Hi everyone, this is Neil. Now there's going to be quite a lot in this week's video, so you might want to make sure you've got plenty of time to sit and watch it. You may want to just watch it through once and then watch it again and stop, because there's an awful lot of, basically the whole video is based around giving you some really good questions to ask yourself, which are going to really help you review how well you've done your first cycle of your ARP. So there's going to be lots of times where you're probably going to want to pause it and have a real think about the questions that are being asked. If I were you, and this is probably just how I work, I find it much easier to do this with somebody else, because you're going to be asked to do a lot of reflective thinking about what happened in your first action. Some people are absolutely fine just to sit and do it by themselves and write down their ideas, and if that works for you, that's absolutely brilliant. If that doesn't work for you, then I would say get together with someone else. Make sure you've both watched the video first and that you have the questions in front of you, and then swap time. An hour to discuss one person's project and then an hour to discuss the other person's project. And I find I personally get so much more out of that. So have a think about that, if that's going to work for you. So remembering our overall slide of the kind of the big picture of the action research project, what we're looking at now is the blue line. And hopefully at this point, you will have, starting at the left, you'd have tried out some kind of action, your first action or intervention you'd have tried out, and you will have generated some data to see how well that action worked. What we're doing now is we're then skipping towards the right-hand end, which is we're looking at reflecting, explaining, and planning. So reflecting on, okay, really what just happened in that action that I tried out, explaining why was that, asking ourselves the question, okay, what have I learnt from that? And then planning what you're going to do next, so that then you then go to the backwards arrow and you're going to get into trying out your second action and generating data. And just as a reminder as well, we're thinking about generating three different kinds of data here. We're thinking about generating data, I data, so what you're observing, what you're noticing, what your assessment is of what's happened. U data, so feedback from other people. Definitely feedback from students for every cycle, because obviously the students are very involved with what you're doing, and hopefully some observer feedback from each cycle as well, which can either have happened, remember, live in the room, that's absolutely great, or you can have videoed what you've been doing and people can review the video with you, and that is equally as great. Both of those work really well, and in fact both of them have strengths and weaknesses, and it's probably a good idea to take both approaches at some point during your cycle. And also, and this is the one that people tend to omit, what are you reading, how are you getting ideas that are going to be really helpful to help you see what's going on. So what research you're reading, and it's really great actually to see that some of you have started putting your reading lists up on the blog. That is brilliant, really good practice, and I would encourage everyone to do that. Tell us what you're reading, show us what you're reading, get it up on the blog so we can see it. That would be really good. And by the way, for the U position, the feedback you're getting from someone else could be from a PG Cert tutor, could be from any other college tutor at BIM, and could be from your peers in your PG Cert group. I think this is a really good moment to start trying to work together as well as possible. I know two of the groups have already started having regular action learning set meetings, where you're getting together in groups of 4 or 5 and sitting down and talking to each other about your projects, and everyone gets time to talk and then they get feedback from everyone else. That is the absolute ideal, and if your group's not doing that yet, then take the responsibility for finding 4 or 5 other people and start getting those meetings arranged, because they're really invaluable. So obviously what we're really doing at this point is you're all doing a cold learning cycle, aren't you? Because you've all done something, you've all done your action research project cycle, and you've generated some data. And what we're getting into now is, okay, reflecting on what just happened, explaining why that was, and planning what we're going to do next. Now that all looks very lovely, but I think we really need to now dig into the whole reflect and explain part, because those look like such simple words, don't they? But the process of doing that is actually really challenging. So what I'm going to give you today is something called the Gibbs reflective cycle, and it's the bit really that helps us get through reflect and explain as effectively as possible. So this is based on Graham Gibbs's work, Learning by Doing, from 1988. And in this, he starts talking about moving beyond learning from experience, as if you just have one experience and learn from it, and towards learning by iteration. So in other words, going round and round the loop. And of course, that's the whole point of action research projects, is that they're all about going round and round the loop and trying to improve. And what tries to improve or develop as we go through these loops is, first of all, our questions. Our questions should become either deeper or more focused as we go along. And it's really great, by the way, if you're noticing new questions arising now that you've done your first cycle, really capture those questions, because when you write your action research project up, writing about, oh, this is how my thinking developed because I developed this new question, or I realised I didn't really know this and I had to go and find out, that's a great way of showing how your project unfolded in real time. And don't get worried if you're generating new questions. You should be generating new questions. That's not only fine, that's a really good part of the process, okay? But how we think should also be developing, because each cycle we go around, we should be learning new things so we can think better, we can think more creatively, we can come up with plans which are more likely to succeed because we now have more knowledge. And of course, we're looking to develop our actions, we're looking to develop our ability to help our students and serve our students in the best possible way. All of this requires, to do this reflective cycle, requires a lot of agency and self-direction on our part. So agency meaning, we just have to do it. There's no one who can do this for us. And self-direction is we decide how we're going to use this tool. Now, I've said before, but I think it bears repeating, that when you start reflecting on what happened in your action, you're not going to be absolutely 100% certain about everything that happened or the reasons why. And again, that's fine. Our classrooms are very messy, complicated places with lots of different things going on. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be hypothesizing. We're going to be coming up with our best judgment about why we think the things that happened. We won't 100% know that we're right, and that's fine. So there'll always be a degree of uncertainty, or in a way kind of a degree of humility about what we're thinking, just not assuming that we're right about everything. And again, sometimes I know in the past people have found that a little bit unsettling. If you find it unsettling, that's fine. You just have to sort of sit with that slight sense of doubt. And all I can say by way of reassurance is, look, this is fine. One thing I would highly recommend is that you get a tutorial after you've done your reflective cycle. So don't use a tutorial for the cycle itself. It's your responsibility to do the reflective cycle either by yourself or with an ally. But then when you've come to your conclusions about your reflective cycle, then that's a really good time to get a tutorial. Okay, so the purposes of using this model are, first of all, actually to help us identify and challenge our own assumptions. What might be the things I was taking for granted that aren't quite right? What might I not have been aware of? And in a way, I think that's really certainly it's Stephen Brookfield's definition of critical thinking. Critical thinking is becoming more aware of the reasons why we're thinking in certain ways and challenging ourselves to see whether we can actually think in more sophisticated ways by getting rid of some of our blind spots. Obviously, we're trying to really scaffold our professional thinking and development. The reason I really like this model that I'm about to show you is because it really helps me reflect and explain those two parts of the Kolb cycle in a very, very rigorous way. It asks us some really difficult and slightly uncomfortable questions, and that's great because it just gives me a way of going, okay, well, if you said I've got to reflect and explain, what does reflect mean? Does it mean I'm going to sit down and have a little think for 2 minutes and then go with the first thing that pops in my head? Well, actually, in reality, for some people, when you look at what they've done for reflect, that is what reflect means. Well, to me, that's not good enough. So this is going to make you really think, and it should actually hurt your brain. And the more it hurts your brain, the more you'll be getting out of it. So that's a good thing. The other thing that I think this model helps us do, there's certainly something I find really helpful about it, is it balances us, forcing us to pay attention to both our strengths and weaknesses. I tend to focus on my weaknesses and be relatively unaware of my strengths. Other people are the other way around. Some people are already fairly well balanced around that. Well, in that case, great. That's a real skill that you've got there. But most of us aren't entirely balanced about our strengths and weaknesses. So being made to think explicitly about both, I think, is really helpful. And it also will get us linking up together theory and practice, the way we're acting, the way we're thinking, and the way we're applying our knowledge. So the model essentially makes us consider 6 questions, and you'll see that these questions really start with reflect, go into explain, and then take us actually towards plan at the end as well. And the 6 questions simply are, well, they look simple, but when we dig into them, there's more in them. What happened? What do I feel about what happened? What was good? What was bad? What sense can I make of what happened? What else could be done? And what actually am I going to do next? And obviously when we're talking about what happened, what do I feel about it, this is all now explicitly in relation to the specific action that you took for the first part of your cycle. Okay. And then to think of this as just basically a set of headings which will then go around for the cycle. We're beginning with description of what happened. Then we're getting into our feelings and thoughts about what happened, so that the more objective we can become about our feelings and thoughts, the more we can capture where our biases are likely to be lying is really what's important about that one. Then we get into some evaluation of what happened. Then we get into some analysis of why it happened. Then we get into some conclusion about, okay, what have I learned from this? What are my takeaways that make me now better informed than I was before I started the cycle? And then we get into, okay, so what am I going to do next? And you can think of it as a cycle, because next time you're going to go around it all around the same way again. So going back to our overall model, just the blue line of the ARP, we're into reflect, explain, plan, and this gives us a really good way, the Gibbs cycle gives us a really good way of doing reflect, explain, plan in the most rigorous way possible, and that then should really help us go back to our next cycle knowing that we've maxed out everything we can learn from the first cycle, and that's what this is about. Okay, so let's start with description. Okay, and that's simply asking the question, so what happened when you took your action? And what you want to do, and I find it's really good, by the way, at this point, even if you're using the method of talking to somebody else, keep a written record. So write this down, and you want to write it down as concisely and clearly as possible, using really specific and relevant detail. What happened when you took it? Okay, and the more specific detail you can capture, the more useful this whole process is going to be for you. And this part's not analytical, it's just the facts of the situation. It's just you saying, okay, this is what happened, here's some specific illustrations of what happened. But the question underlying it is, oh, well, okay, but how objective actually can we be in reporting these? Might it be that we're only noticing the more positive aspects of what happened, or might it be that we're only noticing the more negative aspects of what happened? So can we triangulate here in any way around the description? Could we ask someone else who was in the room and see whether what they think happened is the same as what we think happened, or the most significant things they would pick out, are they the same as the most significant things we would pick out? And going into feelings, what were you thinking and feeling? And again, this is just trying to capture where we were at and just sort of get a sense of whether where we were at the time might have coloured our perceptions in any way. So try and think back and think, well, okay, how were you feeling and what were you thinking prior to the action? Were you excited about it? Were you nervous about it? Were you very confident it was going to work? Were you not confident it was going to work? Did you feel uncomfortable? What were you thinking about which group you were going to do it with? So what sort of frame of mind were you in? And then how did you feel and what were you thinking during your action? Did you have enough free capacity in your mind to actually really be noticing things during the action, or did you just do it and think, well, I'll reflect about it later? There's no right or wrong in any of this. We're just asking you to really kind of capture what was going on at the time. Did you notice anything particularly significant about how you reacted during the action? Sometimes people get very scared halfway through and think, oh my God, I'm trying this new thing. I've no idea whether it's working or not. Sometimes people stay very intrigued. Sometimes people have a sense of being a bit disappointed that you've done all this planning, probably more planning than you would do for a normal lesson about trying this new thing out, and it kind of doesn't go the way you were hoping it was going to go. And so you get disappointed, or you get a bit angry, or you start feeling a bit cross with the students, or you start feeling a bit cross with yourself. So was there anything particularly significant in how you reacted? And now, how did you think and feel, if you can recall, immediately after the action, and how are you feeling about it now? Are you feeling contented, confused, puzzled, intrigued, really clear about what to do next, haven't got a clue about what to do next? Any of these things are fine. There's no right or wrong about any of this. It's just capturing where you're at. And in the light of that, try and sort of step back a bit. Sometimes I think, okay, what would I say if this was somebody else? So if you notice that your emotional tone was, oh, you were a bit pissed off with the students during your action because it didn't go as well as you wanted it to, then I might start thinking about, okay, do you need to revisit your description? If someone shared that with me, I might say, well, do you think in your description of what happened, this might mean that you were paying too much attention to the students and not enough attention to yourself? Or do you think that you might have been noticing more of the negative elements rather than really noticing all of the positive elements? So if you can think about that for yourself, great. If you find it difficult to think about that objectively, just do this little mental exercise of imagining if someone else shared with you all these thoughts and feelings, what questions might you want to ask them? What things do you think they might have missed? And this is a way of trying to capture what are the things that I think I might have missed in terms of my unconscious biases. Okay, now obviously you're going to find that each of these stages takes a while, and you're going to want to stop and really think about each of these as a bit before you move on. As I say, you might want to watch the whole lot first so that you see what the whole cycle does, and then you're going to want to come back and do each stage in turn. And you might not even want to do the whole cycle in one go, because it's good to sort of do a bit of a think about it, write down your ideas, leave it for a bit, come back the next day, see what they look like. The deeper you can dig into this cycle, the better you're going to be. But don't ever think you're going to get to the bottom of the hole, because you're not. Okay, so let me get into the evaluation, and this is the what part. What specifically was good during your action, and what specifically was bad during your action? What worked well? What didn't work well? And I've been saying, and I gave this on some feedback recently, we need to first of all get very clear about the what, and then we're going to get into the why. So this is the what part. And here's some useful prompt questions, and I'm going to suggest that you should really answer these just insofar as they're relevant to your action. From this point on, there's an awful lot of questions that Graham asks, and I find sometimes not all of the questions are relevant to what I've been doing. Well, that's fine. If the question's not relevant, just ignore it. And sometimes I come across a question and I think, ooh, do you know what? I don't know, actually, right now. And the thing I find useful at that point is to move on. Don't get hung up on it and get stuck, because that can feel a bit dreary and dreary. If there's a question you really don't know the answer to yet, notice it, move on, and tell yourself that you will come back to that question later. But as I say, only answer the questions that really are relevant to what you want to be doing. So the first question is, what went well during your action? What worked, and what's your specific evidence for that? Again, make written notes of this, even if you're just talking it through with someone else. And then obviously what didn't go well so well during your action, what didn't work, and what's your specific evidence for that? 2 or 3 little nuggets of really specific evidence are brilliant here for 2 reasons. They're brilliant now because they'll help your thinking, and they're brilliant when you come to write this up because they'll make your write-up very precise and very clear, because you'll really be able to show us what you were thinking. So capture those, write them down now, and also think to yourself, was there a resolution or a conclusion to your action? Sometimes in an action research cycle, you do something and it's sort of a one-off and it concludes and you know what happened. And sometimes it's more open-ended than that. And again, it doesn't matter either way, but just notice which way it is. And the other thing, of course, to ask ourselves now around the evaluation is, we've made our judgment, we've made our subjective judgment, but can you triangulate that in any way? Again, can you get any feedback from students about what they thought worked well and didn't work well? Hopefully you will have generated this kind of data already. Well, now's the point to really look at that and see whether that agrees with what you're thinking. Again, from peers or observers, and from anything you've read. I really want to keep on stressing the reading part here, because you might have got ideas from what you've read, which would be like kind of, oh, right, Hattie says it's really good when students do X, Y, and Z. Did I notice that happening? Yes, I did. Oh, well, then that's part of the what worked well, isn't it? Because I've related that to some research from Hattie suggesting this is a good thing to happen. So just think about how you bring the reading in there. Okay. So then we move on to analysis, and this is the why. So evaluation is the what happened. Analysis is the, okay, so why did it happen? And this is about analysing and creating hypotheses. And the question we ask ourselves is, well, okay, what sense can I make of what happened? Why did it happen the way it did? And this is, in terms of the cycle, this is the most analytical part, right? This is absolutely as analytical as you can make it. Some of the other parts of this cycle aren't analytical at all. The description of what happened, that's not analytical, that's just a description of what happened at the beginning of the cycle. But by now, we're really getting into analysis. And specifically, I think, looking at 2 things. So it's useful to have a focus here. First of all, you're trying to explain the causes of what happened. If something worked well or something didn't work well, why was that? What was the cause of that? But I think you're also trying to think about the consequences. If something happened, what were the consequences and why were those the consequences? So what made something happen? Why did it happen? and what created a consequence, and why did that consequence happen. Consequence might be, oh, the students all got really confused. Okay, so at what specific point did they get confused, and what was the consequence of that? Well, then they didn't really have the learning I wanted them to have, or they lost motivation, whatever it was. So you think about causes and consequences. Now, my personal habit, you can do these two slides either way around, is I'll start with the things that went badly. So I'll reconsider the things that went badly. Well, I've already got my list of the things that went badly and my specific examples from the previous stage of this cycle. And then I'll write down for myself, okay, why do I think they went badly? And I'll just jot down as many different ideas as come into my head. And then I'll think about, okay, what consequences did that lead to? Because it's really important that I'm aware of that, because if I can really capture, okay, that went badly and ooh, this was the result, that's going to help me be more mindful about how not to have that same problem in a future occasion, and I'll notice what results may or may not arise and whether they're different in the future. And then also it's really useful to just at this point immediately jot down some thoughts about, well, what could have been done to avoid these negative consequences, okay? And what I'm asking you to do for both this slide and the next slide, and this is my addition to Graham, okay, now this doesn't come from Graham, it's something I'm adding for you because I've learned how helpful this is myself, is particularly in relationship to the first question, the causes question, what went well and what went badly and why did it go badly, two hypotheses about why you think the things that went badly did. And you want to come up with your best hypothesis about why you think that was, and also your best alternative hypothesis. If you're in an unusual situation where you absolutely 100% know why something went badly, fine, that's all you need. But generally, we don't 100% know. So, what's your best thought about why you think it might be, and what's your best alternative thought about why you think it might be? Okay, then the next slide, we're doing exactly the same thing, but we're doing it in relationship to the things that went well. So, reconsider things that went well, write down why you think they went well, what were the causes of things to go well, what were the consequences of those things going well, were there any unexpected consequences? Oh, there was all this bonus learning that I hadn't even planned for that was really good, or, it generated this really interesting teachable moment that we were able to go with, or, students were learning a skill other than the content. They all worked together really effectively, and they commented about how well they'd worked as a team and why that was, and that was an unexpected bonus. So, think about any of the consequences. Um, Even if things went great, and this is not a reason to beat ourselves up, but even if things went great, there's always something that we could improve. So how could this positive action have been further improved? And again, your best hypothesis, my best thinking about why I think those things went well, and my best alternative thought about why I think those things went well. Now, there's another area we need to hypothesize about, and this is one we will particularly want feedback on because this is the most subjective bit. But of course, in our action research projects, as we've said, we're researching ourselves. We're researching our own teaching. So, in terms of researching ourselves, let's think about our own contribution to the action, because other things would have contributed to the action. The students would have contributed to the action. If you're trying a new activity with a group of students, one of the biggest things that contributes to that action is what the students themselves do. But think specifically about, okay, what was your contribution to the action that you took? How useful was it, and why was it useful? And trying to be as objective about yourself as possible and kind towards yourself. What positive impacts do you think you had during your first cycle action? And what negative impacts do you think you had? And what were you bringing into the room? Had you had a previous experience that helped you plan effectively or helped you act effectively? Or can you compare now? You might not have been aware of that previous experience at the time. Can you compare now the experience of this action with a previous experience you've had? And of course, this whole analysis section really brings us face to face most pointedly with the issue of triangulation. So you do want to think about other people involved in the action. There definitely will have been students. There may have been peers and observers as well. The more people, the better. And as I say, they might have been directly involved on the day, or they might have been involved reviewing video evidence later. And you want to try to assess whether their experience of what happened and their thinking about what happened was similar to yours or different from yours. And this is then a way of beginning to triangulate your own subjective opinions. If what they say is the same as what you think, grand. If what they say is different from what you think, equally grand. But then you need to figure that one out and think about why that was. And that's not to make your perception of what happened wrong. It's just to alert us to the fact that there are different perceptions. Things look different from different angles. And you may want to think about why that is and what you learn from it. So try to write down why you think their experiences were the same as yours or different from yours, and then you're going to have to think about how you would check whether you're right about your evaluation of how similar or how different their experiences were. And the only way you can do that is through direct interaction and asking the right questions. And of course, we don't want to forget about the them position. Again, what can we read? What theories and ideas can we read that are going to help us with our hypothesis generation of why things happened? And this is probably the most important, well, one of the two most important places where your reading interlinks with your action in your ARP. One place where your reading really informs the action is in the planning phase. You read an idea, or something that other people have tried in class that's worked really well. That's going to help inform your planning, and it's going to show you that your planning is coming from somewhere other than just your own intuition. Your own intuition is absolutely fine, but you want something other than your own intuition to inform your planning, so that you've planned an activity which from a well-informed perspective. But the other place that the reading comes in is in helping you generate hypotheses. If you're reading things which say these sorts of things tend to work, or this tends to be a good thing to do with students, then that thinking is going to help inform your thinking about, that might be why that didn't really go very well, because I missed that bit and it seemed to be important. Or, that is why that worked, because actually I achieved this thing which has a really high effect size. So this is where you're going to link your reading very carefully and very precisely. And again, when you're writing this down, try and capture the precise quotes from your reading so that you've got those quotes ready to go in the assignment. The more you can write about things in very specific, concrete detail, rather than in sort of overarching, either abstract or general terms, the better your piece of work is going to be. Okay. So now, conclusion. This is sort of thinking about learning from the whole experience. And the question we ask ourselves to begin with, it's kind of like a mental experiment, is, so what else could I have done? And this is a really good way then of actually using a bit of experimental thinking, really, to help us really think about what we've learned from what just happened. So we reconsider our action, and there's a bunch of questions here, and generally I find that normally 2 or 3 of them will strike me as relevant. So just focus on the ones here that strike you as relevant. So ask yourself, and just see what pops into your head, really. What should I have done differently, or what could I have done differently? In order to, for the action to work even better than it worked. And it's always about making the action better than what happened. So if it was a complete disaster, well, you want it to have been okay. Even if it was good, though, there's always something that could have gone better. So what should or could you have done differently, even though it was already good? What stopped me from doing this? That's often an interesting one. What did I learn about myself during this experience and this action? What did I learn about my strengths and weaknesses as a teacher? What did I learn about my strengths and weaknesses in terms of me as a human being? What specifically did I learn about my current knowledge? In order to do this action well, did I know enough? Was I well enough informed? So what were the strengths and weaknesses, or maybe the gaps in my knowledge? This part of the cycle is great for identifying gaps. And don't freak out if you suddenly think, I just didn't know enough about how to get students giving each other feedback. That's fantastic, because that's telling you very specifically the next bit of reading you need to go away and do in order to do better in your second cycle. So identifying gaps at this point is really, really, really helpful. And I would look at gaps in my current knowledge, and actually then gaps in my teaching practice. It's like, I knew exactly how to get students to give each other peer feedback, but I'm not sure that I explained it very well on the day, or when they came up with problems and they got a bit stuck, I didn't have enough practical knowledge to be able to identify those problems quickly enough to help them with them. So it's that kind of thing. So your knowledge you can think of really as the declarative part of what you're doing, and the level of your teaching practice is the functioning part of what you're doing. So how, what was your level of skill, your strengths, weaknesses, and gaps in terms of actually doing the doing in the classroom. You will probably discover that you've learnt something about your ARP question, and or you now have New questions. Oh, I've realised I don't know about this. Great, that's fantastic. And we can also ask ourselves, the action that I've taken, how far has that helped me meet my ARP improvement goal? We're all starting with projects. How can I improve? Dot dot dot. So really, at the end of this first cycle, how far has the thing improved that you want to improve? So what you're trying to do in this particular part of the reflective cycle is you're just trying to capture what you've learned so far from your action and this very scaffolded reflection on it. What are your 2 or 3 most important takeaways? So you've done a lot of thinking, you've generated a lot of ideas to this point. Now what you're trying to do is, it'll have got very broad and very divergent probably in earlier parts of the cycle as you come up with loads of different ideas. What you're trying to do now is just boil it all down and capture, right, what are the 2 or 3 most important things I've learned from this action and reflection and from my hypotheses about what went well and what didn't go well. And again, you want to be as specific as possible. So you want to try and avoid generalities like, well, I just didn't have the expertise. That doesn't get you very far. You need to be more specific. It's like, well, I specifically didn't have the expertise to do X, so now I need to go and work on that. That's going to get you much further into cycle 2. And that's the kind of thing, of course, you can take into a tutorial, because you can say in the tutorial, Neill or Sue or Pedro or Rich or Ruth, whoever you're having a tutorial with, look, I've realised that actually I really need to get better at explaining this activity, so let's talk about that. And then the tutor can help you with the specific thing that you've learned you need to work on in order to do the cycle better next time round. And you'll get a lot more value from your tutorial in that way. And finally, it's a lot of thinking, I did warn you, we come to the action plan. So what next? And again, here's some useful questions that should help you make a really good plan for your next cycle. So what do I need to do in order to be better prepared to teach more effectively in the future? What do I need to learn? What do I need to change? What skill do I need to practice or develop? Even if the action was fully positive and I did really well, in which areas can I still further improve? How well triangulated am I? All my perceptions that I've come up with here, I've got my own subjective perceptions, but am I able to line up what I think against what other people have directly told me? Am I able to line up what I think against things that I've read, which will help explain to me why things have happened in the way they have? What's the priority areas I need to develop? If you had one piece of deliberate practice, and it might even be a piece of deliberate practice you want to do before your next cycle, it's like literally next week, I just want to sharpen up this particular teaching skill because I'm going to need to use it well for the next cycle. What do you need to develop? Or it could be, okay, what's the priority area I need to develop actually in the next cycle itself? It can go either way. And what specific steps do I need to take in order to achieve these improvements? I know that there's an improvement I need. What do I need to do? Do I need to read something? Do I need to talk to somebody? Do I need to book a tutorial? Do I need to get an observation? Do I need to talk to a peer? Do I need to have an action learning set? What is it that I need to do right now that's going to help me make my improvements? And then closing the circle, the 2 questions that you really need to be very clear about in your mind before you move on to your next cycle is, first of all, okay, so how exactly does cycle 2 link with cycle 1? What have I learnt from cycle 1 that's going to inform my planning for cycle 2? So you've done a whole cycle, you've done stuff, you've generated data, and now you've reflected on it and analysed it in a very thorough and rigorous way, okay? To the best of our ability. As I say, you won't get to the bottom of this particular hole because it's never ending. But I've reflected on it in as rigorous a way as I can. I should now be able to go into cycle 2 hoping that whatever I do next is going to be more effective, and it's going to be more effective because I've learnt something. I'm now not the same person as I was going into cycle 1. I've learnt something hopefully of value that's going to help me do it again, but do it better. So what have I learnt from cycle 1 specifically that's informing my planning for cycle 2, and then that will inform me while I undertake it? And again, capture that, because that becomes a really important part of the narrative when you write up your action research projects, because as I've said before, we're looking for a thread that goes, here was cycle 1, this is how it linked to cycle 2, here was cycle 2, this is how it linked to cycle 3, here's my ideas for the future. And as you're reading it, it's fantastic to read. And actually, as you're writing it, it's really fantastic and rewarding to write, because you can really see that whole trajectory of development occurring, and you can see how people were changing and learning as they went along. And that, of course, is the whole point. Right, so really meaty this week, lots and lots in all of that. But hopefully what that gives you is, when we look at the cold cycle and go, oh, reflect and explain, this now should have exploded that in microscopic detail, and given you loads and loads and loads of strategies, ammunition, and questions to ask yourself that will help you do the reflect and explain in the very best possible way. And there may be things here, by the way, that you want to take for your own teaching when you're getting your students doing reflecting and explaining as well, and just not giving them all of this, because they would, their brains would melt into a black hole. But just one or two of the questions. I quite often find that these are some of the questions that I use when I'm teaching, just to help my students with the reflection or explanation part of a cold cycle. And again, that's just like hopefully a bit of double bubble and an added bonus for you out of all of this. Right, really looking forward to seeing what you come up with. Enjoy.